Shalom guys, welcome back to another episode here at YASHAV Ministries with Casa de Israel. I appreciate you for being here. I appreciate you for your support. But before we get to the Torah and this Torah portion, we will do the Torah blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Hamevorach, Baruch Adonai Hamevorach leolam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bahar banu mikol ha'amim, benatan lanu et torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Bless Adonai who is blessed, bless Adonai who is blessed now and forever. Blessed are you, Adonai, sovereign of the universe, who has chosen us from among the nations and has given us the Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. This week's Torah portion is two Torah portions. Again, this year it has a lot of Torah portions, double Torah portions. So it is Behar and Bechukotai. Okay, Behar means mountain or mount. Bechukotai means in my statute or my statute. We will be focusing on Torah portion Behar this year. And it's interesting because when I started this YouTube channel for the youth, I started with Torah portion Behar. And I talked about the sabbatical year and the Shemitah year. But I'm going to look at it in a different perspective this year. And then as we go to next year, we'll get more in depth and we'll probably lean into Bechukotai a little bit. But we're going to start with Behar. And so Behar starts in Leviticus 25. Verse 1, it says the following. Vayadaber Adonai el Moshe Behar Sinai lemor. Daber el Bnei Israel wa amata alechem ki tavo'u el haaretz asher ani noten lachem wa shabta haaretz Shabbat le Adonai. In English, says the following. The Lord then spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When you come into the land which I shall give you, then the land shall have a Shabbat to the Lord. 6 years you shall sow your field, and in the 6th year you shall prune your vineyard and gather in crops. But during the 7th year the land shall have the Shabbat rest, a Shabbat to the Lord. You shall not sow your field, nor prune your vineyards. Your harvest after growth you shall not reap, and your grapes of untrimmed vines you shall not gather. The land shall have a Shabbatical year. All of you shall have the Shabbat products of the land for food, yourselves and your male and your female slaves, and your hired men and your foreign residents who live as aliens with you, even your cattle and animals that are in your lands. You shall have all its crops to eat. You are also to count 7 Shabbats of years for yourselves, 7 times 7 years, so that you have the time of the 7 Shabbats of years, namely 49 years. You shall then sound a ram's horn abroad on the 10th day of the month, the 7th month. On the day of atonement you shall sound a horn all through your land. You shall thus consecrate the 5th year and proclaim a release through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to its own property, and each of you shall return to his family. You shall have the 50th year as a jubilee. You shall not sow nor reap its aftergrowth, nor gather from the untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You shall eat its crops out of the field. On this year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his own property. If you make a sale, moreover, to your friend, or buy from your friend's hand, you shall not wrong one another corresponding to the number of years. After the jubilee, you shall buy from your friend. He's to sell you according to the number of years of crop. Okay, so here is getting in detail of how the jubilee works and how it's going to be negotiated between you and your brother. But okay, before we get to that and before we get too far into this Torah portion, I want to take a step back, because why is Israel given this command about the land? Or what I had explained last year, that the land is what produces for the people. Remember, the people are given this land that is not there. Is Elohim's. God gave them this land because this is God's land. This is the land that he chose. So advice, parentheses, like my pastor says, the land of Israel as it is right now is where God put his name. Okay, so if you believe in the Bible, the God of Israel put his name on Israel. Don't curse Israel. Don't speak bad about the land. Close parentheses. Elohim gives them the land. He is the one that owns the land. They're basically leasing or renting this land. So mentally, it is not completely theirs. It is Elohim. Elohim gave it to them. Yes. But the land is his. They maintain it. They take care of it. And he says, I'm going to give you this land and you're going to let it rest, right? Every 7 year, on the 7th year, you will let it rest. Because remember, the land is producing for you 6 years. So you have to be conscious that the land needs to rest. You have to show some care for this land. You have to show some appreciation to creation. Saying that, telling them, this land is going to give you crops and food. Make sure that on the 6th year you are prepared, because that 7th year you are supposed to let the land rest. And you're going to count 7 of these shmitas, right? They're called shmitas. And so we're going to count 7 of these. And on the 49th year, the ram's horn is going to be sounded on Yom Kippur, and it's going to be declaring the year of Jubilee. Now, let's go back to Genesis 47. Genesis 47 states that Joseph, after his brothers and everybody had been settling in Goshen, giving them the best lands, it says that the people started to get hungrier, and they started to sell what they had to Egypt. So they gave them all the money, then they gave them all the cattle, and eventually they gave themselves completely. So the people were in debt with Egypt. So the people owed Egypt service because they had sold themselves to Egypt so that they can survive the famine. The problem is that once they stay there and assimilated, the new Pharaoh is starting oppressing them. And it says that they cried out. And when they cried out is when God heard their cry, and they were released from that bondage because they had a debt with Egypt. But Elohim took them out because of their oppression, because Pharaoh was being unjust, because he was oppressing them out of fear that they might turn against him and leave him. So he oppresses them. Elohim saves them, brings them into the desert, teaches them his statutes, like we're learning right now. And he's saying, okay, I've taught you my statutes. I've given you the blueprint of my temple and my sanctuary. I'm giving you the process how you approach me. Understand that when you enter into my land, you have to let it rest. You have to be conscious that you have to understand that the land gives you everything on my behalf. You need to consider it. Don't oppress the land. Don't oppress the people. Because then it says that your brother, you and your brother have to have a certain negotiation. Understanding that it has to be fair based on the crops, and it's very technical. We're not going to get into the technicalities of it. But if somebody wasn't following the Shemitah years and they got into a hole in which they're not keeping the Shemitah years, so they lose their land, or they give it to their brother, they sell it to their brother, or they lease it to their brother, then they have to work to redeem it, and they won't get it back to the Jubilee year. I know, it sounds confusing. But understand this, you go into the land, you receive God's promises. Don't forget that you once were in Egypt in a debt, and you were redeemed. And now that you're going to enter the land and be the ones leading, the ones taking over the land, remember that you shall not oppress those that come in, or your brother. Be understanding that once you were oppressed and you were redeemed by me. Don't oppress the land, don't oppress your people, don't oppress your brother, don't oppress the nations. You're called to be a light to the nations. Sabbatical year teaches us that. Now, this week, 2 Torah portions, Behar, Bechukotai. And so, Leviticus basically 25, verse 1 through Leviticus 27, verse 34, when you combine both Torah portions. Now, you have the Haftorah, which is the prophets portion, which is Jeremiah chapter 16 through chapter 17, 14, and the New Testament portion. And so from the New Testament portion, we're going to read Matthew 21, verse 33 to 46. Yeshua says, listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard and put a wall around it and dug a wine press in it and built a tower and rented it out to the vineyard growers and went on a journey. When the harvest time approached, he sent his slave to the vineyard growers to receive his produce. The vineyard growers took his slaves and beat one and killed one another and stoned a third. And again, he sent another group of slaves larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. But afterward, he sent his son to them, saying, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. They took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to us? Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vineyard growers? They said to him, we will bring those wretches to a wretched end and will rent out the vineyard to other vineyard growers who will pay him the proceeds at the proper season. Yeshua said to them, did you never read in the scriptures? The stone in which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. This came about from the Lord, and it is a marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing the fruit of it. He who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but on whoever it falls, they will scatter him like dust. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them, and they sought to seize him. They feared the people because they consider him to be a prophet. Here, this parable is explaining that the vineyard owner gives his vineyard to those vineyard growers to maintain it in the sabbatical year, and it's understood that they were supposed to take everything that they needed for themselves, their slaves, like we read, and then everything that was growing naturally on the Shemitah year, they were supposed to let the land be, and everything that came out was for those that were in need, those that were poor and slaves, they were able to take from that produce from that land. Because remember, the land, it wasn't the vineyard grower's land, it was the vineyard owner. In this parable, Elohim is the vineyard owner. The vineyard grower is Israel. Israel was to provide for the people in the world. They were maintaining the land so that that fruit, they will obviously take from it, but from that fruit they were able to help the world and help those in need, not only outside of Israel but inside of Israel. But they did not do that. They oppressed one another. One of the biggest problems that Israel did, besides idolatry, is that they didn't let the land rest. And when they were in the land in the time of Yeshua, they rejected to help those in need. Elohim gave them the opportunity. He reminded them that they were in Egypt once, that they were in debt in a land that they didn't own. He redeemed them and gave them a land that they don't own. Elohim owns it. He just wanted them to be fair, to do justice, A&R, justice and righteousness, help those in need with that land. The Shemitah year and the year of Jubilee, in a lot of cases, was proclaimed, the year of Jubilee specifically, was proclaimed when a new king was established. So it's interesting that Yeshua, as we read Isaiah 61, he is reading Isaiah 61, he proclaims the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee, all debts were canceled, everybody was to be set free. The essence of the Shemitah and the Jubilee year was equality. There was supposed to be a agricultural cycle in which everybody had what they needed from the land. Everything was provided by Elohim, and we were supposed to be fair with one another. We can't take what the Lord and God has given us and act like it's ours. We're supposed to minister what we have, minister what we get from Elohim, and pass that on to those that are in need, and be an example and be a light to the world. Consider keeping the Shabbat. Just as the land needs to rest, your body needs to rest. Just as your ideas take over your life, understand that you have to depend on Elohim, and that land needed to be rested because it depended on Elohim, and they had to learn to depend on Elohim, not on their own work and not on their own might. That being said, think about it. Let's be a community, let's be a family, let's be united, and let's divide it. Have a great week. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.